Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our next live stream. I'll be your producer for this session. Before we start, I do have some quick housekeeping. Please take a moment to read our code of conduct. We seek to provide a respectful environment for both our audience and presenters. While we absolutely encourage engagement in the chat, we ask that you please be mindful of your commentary, remain professional, and on topic. Keep an eye on that chat. We'll be dropping helpful links and checking for questions for our presenters to answer live. Our session is being recorded. It will be available to view on demand right here on the Reactor channel. With that, I'd love to turn it over to our speakers for today. Thank you for joining.
Hello, hello, hello. Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. How are you doing, Hamish? I'm not sure if it is too late or too early for you.
Yeah, g'day, mate. Yeah, hi, everyone. And yeah, good morning, afternoon, and evening, wherever you're coming from. I'm coming to you from New Zealand, which means it's always some crazy hour of the day.
Good to have you here. So together, we're gonna go through this hour, this session today, design and develop SQL solutions like a pro, right? The idea is to start this preparation for the SQL+AI certification, the new DP-800 that we're all excited about. So we have a long hour ahead, a ton of topics to cover. So let's start. A little bit about myself. I am Javier Villegas from Buenos Aires, Argentina. I am Microsoft MVP in the data platform award category and also Microsoft certified trainer. I work at the Mediterranean Shipping Company as IT director, and I'm one of the local members of our community here, SQL Argentina. You have my contact information over there. Feel free to reach out to me. This is my LinkedIn. In the QR code, you will also jump to the LinkedIn page. So looking forward to meet you there. Hamish.
Yeah, g'day, everyone. Yeah, Hamish Watson, based out of New Zealand. I'm a data platform MVP. I'm also lucky enough to be an AI platform MVP. I run a couple of companies. Funnily enough, Mediterranean Shipping Company was one of my clients in a previous corporate life. So Javier, we probably need to have a chat later on, mate. And,
Sure.
and yeah, I guess my LinkedIn profile is there in the slide as well as a blog that I've been writing for about 15 odd years now. But yeah, really excited to be part of today and to help people. Funnily enough, I was one of the contributors that led into DP-800. So yeah, it's kind of cool to talk about something that I lived and breathed for a bit of a while. Yeah.
For a while now, right? So yeah. Good. So this is the 60 days data and AI, the data days, right? This is a series that's gonna end in August, I believe. At this point, it just started, so there are a bunch of sessions ahead in multiple languages, in Spanish, in English, I believe Portuguese as well. So definitely feel free to scan the QR code, go to the URL aka.ms/database. All the information about this series, you're going to find it over there. So that's your starting point to start learning and to get on board into this certification, the DP-800, but also the other ones related to Microsoft Fabric, the DP-600 and DP-700. We're going to go through deeper in a little bit about that. So, Hamish, it's always good to be able to get certified for free, right? So, following this series, you're going to have the opportunity to get 100% discount voucher for you to take any of the Fabric or SQL exam, the one I just mentioned before. So for you to start filling the form, don't do it now. Do it just after we finish this session. You're gonna see these links multiple times during this hour ahead, aka.ms/dd/cert, right? Over there, you're gonna be able to claim your voucher to get certified, right? This is a great initiative that actually I was digging in earlier today, the SQL+AI Fampathon, right? By the way, super nice name, Prompathon, right? Still not sure how to pronounce it, but this is a repository in GitHub that will help you to practice in some of the areas that we're going to be discussing, not only today, but on the rest of the series, right? Will help you to set up everything you need in your local environment with the container, with your, MCP, with your AI models, and of course, with your SQL database in order to start doing your AI journey within SQL Server. So, aka.ms/dd/prompathon, right? Take a look at this GitHub repository. I just downloaded it earlier today, and it's really awesome. This is all you need to get started with. So this is the full series ahead. We are starting today, July 15, right? As you may know, is also covering other time zones. So this is the one for EMEA and US. Then later on is going to be the one for APAC, right? So as you can see, some of the sessions will be also on a different time zone live as well, right? So the benefit of being able to be live here is that we can all interact and have fun and ask a bunch of questions. We hope, because we have great moderators in the YouTube channel helping us with all your questions. So please ask all of the questions. They will try to answer all of them, and probably we will also help if we have the opportunity to, right? So please meet Mike, right? Mike is in YouTube right now. Here is his contact information. Also, Chef, right? Helping us today with the moderation part, and Shabhan Ray also in the chat. So between the three of them and both of us, we will try to go through this session today. So Hamish, this is what we're going to be covering today, right? Bunch of topics, but basically, I will say this is the foundation of the exam, and also the foundation for SQL Server, right? We've been working with SQL for many years, so we're going to go through some of the basic things within SQL and some other more advanced things that we're going to be discovering nowadays. So initially, we will go through an overview of the exam, right? The DP-800. Don't worry that much. Just make sure that you get the concept. There's going to be one session at the end of the full series that's going to be focusing on how to pass the exam, right? On all the technicality on how to take the exam, if you go to do it in place to a training location, if you do it at your place remotely, all the tips and tricks related to the exam itself, right? But today we're going to cover, as I said, the overview. We're going to go through the design and implementation of database objects, right? Then we're going to start getting deep into the topic with the implementation programmability objects. Then we will jump to write advanced T-SQL code, and we're going to close the day-to-day with AI-assisted database development, right? What do you think, Hamish? We have a bunch of things ahead, right?
Oh, mate, we certainly do. I just want to say, and again, I'm going to show my bias because I helped contribute to this, to DP-800. And one thing I really love about this certification is it isn't just another SQL exam. It actually reflects how we actually build systems today. You know, if we look at, 2, 3, maybe, well, 5 years ago, developers really did not talk about vectors, embeddings, and definitely not about GitHub Copilot. And so we're actually going to be talking about the normal, right? The now. And so, yeah, I'm loving how this certification and the material behind it really talks about how the role has evolved from database developer to database engineer, and it's really cool, cool thing. Yeah. Anyway,
Yeah. So while you were talking, I switched to this slide because it's actually represent, right, the DP-800, right? The role is targeted to developer, as the name may imply, but as you said, it's more for a database engineer, right? Of course, the developer part is a big chunk of the role, right? But database engineer from the ground out to, being an expert. And, the core platforms that we're going to be focusing on is Microsoft SQL with all its flavors, right? SQL Server on-prem or running on virtual machines, Azure SQL, MI database, and also SQL database in Microsoft Fabric, the brand new flavor that we have since Ignite last year, right? Here are some of the key skills that are going to be measured in order to obtain the certification, right? Of course, T-SQL development, right? T-SQL is something that we will need all the time. Just as a heads up, when you take the exam, you won't see any, graphical user interface. You need to know how to do the things with Translate SQL, right? Get your hands really dirty writing T-SQL. We will also cover the designing relational and semi-structured data models because, as you know, Hamish, in SQL Server, nowadays we also have semi-structured with JSON as a native data type. We're going to be covering all this as well. CI/CD with GitHub, also an important thing, right? AI fundamentals with embedding vectors and models, and AI assistant development tool, right? That there are a bunch of those really cool in this new SQL world, right? Then for the role, we're going to build secure, scalable database solutions. We're going to integrate AI with our database-driven applications, optimize and deploy governed SQL workload, and finally, work with apps developers, DBA, architects, AI, DevOps, engineers, and make secure and compliance, right? So, as we said before, this is a journey of sessions. The exam will cover all these 3 different topics, or I would say buckets, right? Today, we're going to be focusing on the first bucket, design and develop database solution. And as you can see over there, between parentheses, you will see 35 to 40%. That is the weight that how Microsoft will measure the amount of questions or the score or everything combined, right, for the exam. Then we have implement data security and compliance as another topic. Tomorrow, there's going to be sessions for that as well. And finally, deep dive into implement AI capabilities, right? So today, we're going to be covering the foundations, right? Table, indexes, constraints, store procedure views, right? But we're going to go through the AI assisted tool as well. So let's start with the very first topic, design and implement database options, right? An important thing to mention here is that everything that we will be covering today, as I briefly said at the beginning, right? You can do it on Azure SQL DB, managed instance, your SQL Server on-prem, in your virtual machine, or Microsoft SQL in Fabric, right? So doesn't matter where you're gonna deploy your database, right? It's the same for this, at least for this fundamental part, right? So these are the platforms of our choices, right? I forget to mention Docker and Kubernetes, because as you know, we can also run SQL Server in Linux and also containers, right? And well, my favorite is still on-prem, but also EMEA. So we have SQL Server 2025 in where we can do all the things that we will be covering today. So we start with table design, right? So when we have to start working with, we need to create our tables to be able to store the data that our application will be hosting, right? And in order to do that, we have to do it in the right way, right? Most important thing is choose the right data types, right? Because sometimes we can say, oh, let's put everything varchar max, and then we just put just few characters over there, but then it's not going to be optimized in terms of storage and in terms of performance, right? When we start creating indexes, that we're going to see it later on, which is super important for what we're going to be doing here, right? Not only the data type, but also the sizes is super important for this operation. Then normalize and denormalize for read heavy workload is super important to have in mind, right? And something that you may know, but it's also important to remind it every time that we talk about table design, is every single table needs a primary key, right? Make it narrow and make it immutable, right? What do you think, Hamish?
Oh yeah, totally, mate. And one of the reasons why this is in the course is, I spent too many hours working with clients and developers, helping them fix databases where someone's chose nvar max for everything. And I guess one of the fundamental things of AI stuff is that your data's got to be on point. And choosing good data types sounds boring until your database is 2 terabytes larger than it should be.
When you have few rows in your databases, you won't notice any problem. But when your application becomes mainstream or mission critical, well, if you definitely are running out of integer values and you have to switch to big int, it never happened, right, Hamish?
Exactly.
It's a big problem. So it's super important to spend the right amount of time and effort on the design. That is why ourselves and the exam is also pushing a lot into this direction. Is, I would say, one of the most important thing when we are architecturing an application that rely on SQL Server or any other database engine, by the way. Mm-hmm. And there are several types of tables, right? There are the in-memory OLTP tables, the temporal tables, external tables, ledgers, and graphs, right? So it's not only one type of table. And, just covering them very quickly, if we are doing an OLTP application and we need, the best performance available, one of the possibilities in memory OLTP tables, in where it's going to allow us to allocate the whole table in memory, right? With a kind of lock-free mechanism, right? And if we have to do bunch of small transaction, that thousand of them, probably in memory OLTP is a good option, right? If we would like to keep track of the changes, every time we do an insert, update, delete, and we would like to, have a spot to be able to keep track of all those changes because of our application design, etc. Temporal is the way to go. External tables, something super interesting as well. You're going to be able to store tables remotely, right? In a blob storage, in an Amazon S3, in another database engine like Oracle, with no data movement. So using Polybase in Microsoft SQL, you're going to be able to reference this data that is outside your SQL environment, but use it locally to join it with your physical tables and everything, right? So external tables, super cool. Ledger, right? If you are working with an application that requires to be tampered evident and make sure that nobody, and when I say nobody, not even the database administrations are capable of tampering the data, right? Ledger table is the way to go, right? Because there is a cryptographic verification, right? So if you have to prove that there was no changes on the table because you are going through an audit process or something like that, Ledger is the way to go, right? And then for more advanced application like Node plus Edge tables, we can always go to Graph. Graph is an area that I love. We can spend hours talking about this. Is the foundation of social networking, right? So when you have nodes and edges, right? So as you can see here, there are a bunch of types for table, not only the one that we use just by doing create table. And when we talk about tables, we also need to optimize those tables with indexes, right? And here there is a list of all the indexes that SQL Server support, right? Cluster index that define the physical sort order on the table for the data, right? And as you can see in the slide, it's only one per table. Then non-cluster indexes that will help us to speed up all the lookup activities, right? In the slide, it say up to 999. I will say never reach that number, right? Definitely you're gonna see a lot of discussions about which is the right number and the right way to create non-cluster indexes, right? But definitely, as everything, when you are designing, when you are architecturing your application, is something that you have to take into consideration. Column store indexes. This is a column-based storage for analytical and data warehouse workload, right? This is mainly for analytical purposes. Filter indexes, right? There is a way in SQL Server in where you can specify in the index creation a filter, so just make the index for a specific subset that will help us for a specific query optimization. Full text search, right? That will enable natural language search across text context. So if you have, tables with product descriptions, right? You can create the full text search indexes and go through the data underneath. And in SQL Server 2025 JSON indexes, right? We have SQL Server native data type JSON, right? Before SQL Server 2025, we were able to work with JSON, but storing it as a varchar or mvarchar. Now it's JSON native data type and JSON indexes, right? Which will help us all the queries on the JSON document. And finally, for vectors, when we store in the new vector data type, when we store the embeddings that we're going to see later on for the AI part, right? there are also vector indexes that will help us to speed up all those lookups, all those searches that we do, right? Also, when we talk about tables, we have to talk about constraints, right? And specifically, we're going to focus in as well on the JSON support. But when we need to enforce the data integrity, we have to create a constraint, right? First of all, primary keys, right? Super important. Unique row ID is cluster, and it doesn't support nulls. No, right? Foreign key, when you are doing a referential integrity, let's say that you have your object and your description on a different table. If you need to do this reference, right, foreign key is the way to design table structure so you don't repeat data and you just have references. When you need to store unique values, right, you create a constraint with the unique values so you are 100% sure that the value that you have in that specific constraint that you define with one or more columns, right, is a unique combination. Change constraint, right, if you need to specify, for example, values that has to be positive or it has to be between a range, as in the example in here, you're going to specify check constraint and default constraint. So meaning that when you do the initial insert, if you don't specify any specific data, the data that you define in the default constraint will be automatically added, right? Like, for example, the most common one is the get date information, right? So you make sure that you store when the data was inserted, right? Also, within JSON, right, as I said earlier, we have JSON columns, native data type, and indexes, right, with several functions, new functions that you handle and modify JSON. You're going to find several questions related to how to handle JSON in the exam, right? And you see here, for example, some functions like JSON value, JSON query, JSON modify, which is the one I use the most, that help us to go deep into a specific JSON document, right, and modify one of the nodes or one of the values underneath. So it's like combining, table, relational, transactional information with semi-structure, right? Because in a specific row, right, in one specific column within that row, you store an up to 2 gigabyte JSON document, right? And you can modify any of the attributes over there. So super, super cool. And if you need, for example, to validate if the document is well formatted, you have the isJSON function as well, right? So as you can see here, in terms of the basic for constraint and in terms of the more advanced, started supported in SQL Server 2025, we cover it all. Then we go a little bit further away with sequences and partition, right? Sequences is you can consider sequences like an identity value, but there are a little bit more advanced and they have several benefits if you compare with identity value. First of all, you can create an identity object and share it across tables, right? To generate values, configure cycling, and work. And what is really good is that also work with link server, right? If you work with identities, you may have some problems with that in the past. If you create sequences that will help us, not for every single use case, but definitely they are aware for you to use it, right? Here there are some examples and definitions on how to use sequences, right? And then partitioning, right? When we work with the big amount of data, big tables, it's super good to take this time at the beginning of the design process to say, hey, this table will end up having millions of rows, right? Because if you have a table with those millions of rows and then you have to partition table in order to apply an archiving or deletion strategy, convert a huge plain table into a partition one is also a mess. So it's good to have this from day one. Have you run into this problem, Hamish, in the past to have to partition a, a table?
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
So that's right.
I really love the fact, the course content actually builds on some fundamental SQL Server database things that are going to help with performance, right? And so yes, I have run into these, and it's great that this is in there to actually just help people run their databases a lot more efficiently. Yeah.
And the key point here, I would say, is that it minimizes the downtime, right? So when you have to do any maintenance on your table, or for example, you have to get rid of a chunk of data, you won't generate extra lock-ins, right? But doing the manual deletion, you can just, truncate a specific partition. But in order to do that, you have to design the table with that specific partition scheme and partition functions, etc., in the right way from day one, right? Super, super important. So let's jump to the second module, right? Implement programmability objects, right? Here we're going to talk about how to program or some of the objects that we use within SQL Server, right? The first one we're going to be talking today is views, right? The views, you can define them as virtual tables that can simplify a complex query, right, and provide security boundary, right? What does it mean? You can have multiple tables, right? And you say, hey, I may want to generate this view based on that specific query that will join multiple other tables and have some filters, etc. So you make sure that you are not duplicating the data and creating a new table. You are just generating this new glass, let's say, to view the data on a different way, right? They are super useful when you are working with large amount of tables. So maybe depending on your application requirement, views is a good way to consider, right? You can also create indexes at the top of a view to speed up and a specific search, right? And you can also combine the output of multiple tables, reduce the amount of columns, create calculated columns at the top of it, right, with data from multiple tables. So they are super cool, and we use them all the time. There are several best practices when we talk about views, right? For example, one of the possibilities is to use the schema binding option, right? So we make sure that if someone modified or wants to modify the underlying table, is going to get a message saying, hey, listen, this table, this specific column is being used for a table, so you are not able to change it, right? The other one, and I will say the number one, is always avoid the select star, right? And this is not only for views, it's for everything, right? Because we have seen many broken applications through the years because somebody added an additional column into the table, and the store procedure that rendered the output into the application now returns an additional column because we use the select star, right? Instead, we need to specify each of the columns. Then store procedures, right? Super important. I would say this is core, right? When we work with SQL, because it's allow us to encapsulate business complex logic within a piece of code, right? It's super cool because they support input and output parameters to return, right? So we can create a query with input parameters, one or more, right? And depending on those parameters, instead of always running the ad hoc query, right, we encapsulate that logic within the store procedure, and we only call the store procedure with those parameters, and we get the output. The output could be a scalar value, it could be a data set, it could be multiple data sets, right, that can help us to feed our application, right? So I would say super important, and one of the things that we can use with the store procedure is we can grant execute permissions to a specific group or users, right? So maybe we don't grant access to the underlying tables or the data itself, but for the application purposes, we just grant permission for the store procedure itself, right? So instead, to be able to go through and dig into all the data, we allow the users to execute that procedure or the application to execute that specific procedure, and we make the whole architecture more secure, right? Within the programmability part, we also have user-defined functions, and there are three flavors, right? The scalar functions, they always return a single value, right? One of the most common examples that we used to provide many years ago is, like, for example, if you want to convert from Celsius to Fahrenheit or the other way around, you create a scalar function, you specify the input value, and you get the one converted. That is the silly one, right? But you can use a scalar function for any other things. Just consider that the result is a scalar value, right? We can be discussing about a scalar function and the implication in the SQL performance for months, right? But I want you to be aware that they exist and you can use it. My recommendation is, use it with caution. Don't use it for everything, right? There are other tables that are super cool, like the inline table value, right? They will return a subset, right? That you can use it to, for example, join or to do a cross apply or outer apply with that, right? So remember, always use they will return a subset, a data set, right? And then you have the multi-statement table value function, in where you can, prepare the logic in multiple steps and then finally return the subset. The difference between the inline and the multi-statement is that the inline is only one statement that you generate over there, and you get your result set. The multi-statement table value function, you can do a more complex logic within, right? Again, functions are super cool, especially the scalar ones. This is not for the exam. This is real life. Make sure that you use it with caution, right? Then we have triggers. Yes, Hamish.
No, I was agreeing.
Triggers. And triggers is also an important component when we talk about SQL, because we can do multiple cool things with triggers. Same thing as I said before, for the functions. Use them with precaution, right? But it's good that we know that they exist, and in some cases we can use them, right? And we have multiple types. For example, DML triggers, data manipulation triggers, right? So every time we do an insert, update, or delete on a specific table, we can say, hey, after you see one insert, update, delete, do this, right? And is good for certain use cases, right? Then we have other kind of trigger, the data definition language for triggers, right? When we do create, alter, or drop table, procedure, functions, whatever, we can make it generate an action with those triggers. And then we have finally the logon triggers, right? That every time that a specific user get login and get authenticated into the system, right? You can keep track of the activity. These are good, for example, if you want to keep track of the activity, like an auditing or something like that. There is a big set of best practices for triggers, right? And the first one is the most important. Keep trigger logic minimal, right? Don't do a bunch of complex business logics within the trigger, because you're gonna pay off with performance, right? Avoid the nested trigger, one trigger that call another and so on. That is also a big recommendation. So now we jump to a little bit more advanced coding technique. So Hamish, I give you the mic.
Yeah, cool. Thanks, mate. Yeah, so for this section, we are going to cover advanced techniques for more complex things. And the first section here is CTEs, or common table expressions, which define temporary named result sets within a single statement. So we've got a couple of examples here, and this is really important because looking at CTEs, they're one of those things that might look scary the first time you see them, but suddenly they will become quite indispensable in terms of what you're doing within your code or application. And so recursive CTEs, they handle hierarchical data. So think of like organization charts, bill of materials, that type of thing. And the pattern here is where we anchor union all where we have a union all recursive member with a max excursion hint. Quite important to have this. And yeah, recursive, correlated subqueries, where we're referencing the outer query and we're executing once per row. So this is quite important because we can have quite a bit of a performance hit with this. And of course, our good friends, cross apply and outer apply, these are quite powerful alternatives for table valued expressions. So if you're doing anything with table valued functions as well as expressions, you really do have to be quite careful because I think of CTEs and subqueries kind of like triggers, actually, what we were just talking about, because they're a little bit like chili. A little bit can make something great, but if you're using too much, suddenly everyone regrets it. So yeah, just again, use it carefully. If we move on to the next slide, which is around window functions. Yeah, so these can perform calculations across rows related to both the related row, without collapsing result sets like group by. And there's 4 different types we're going to talk to here within the material. So ranking functions, row numbers. Row number is always unique. Rank allows ties, and dense rank has no gaps within it. Whereas the next set of functions, like offset functions like lag and lead, these access both previous rows and next rows without the requirement of having any self joins. And thing is, if you're using functions and you're using things like self joins and what have you, this course will, if this is a new paradigm for you to consider how you're using Windows functions, then yeah, this course might change your life. The thing that underpins all this, each of these functions is, the open clause. So we want to use petition by, to define our groups, and order by to define the sequence. And of course, we want to limit the amount of rows that we're using with all of our window functions. Very powerful, but also like triggers, please use cautiously and where appropriate. Alrighty, so JSON and XML, as mentioned before, I love what SQL Server 2025 has brought forward in JSON, because in the past, developers love using JSON, whereas DBAs or data engineers might love it slightly less than they do. But the cool thing is that JSON and XML processing allows us to work with semi-structured data directly within T-SQL, so we don't have to learn another language to handle it. And a couple of call outs here, for JSON path converts, our result sets to JSON. So now it's kind of like a bridge between, DBAs, data professionals, with app developers, as well as, open JSON, which allows us to shred, that JSON into relational rows. JSON value, extracts scalars. JSON query extracts objects, and JSON modify allows us to update it in place. And of course, moving on to XML, we've got a whole range of functions here which allow us to work with something that in the past has really hindered or caused issues within SQL Server, well, most databases really. And I guess one call out is if you are developing, new apps, new systems, what have you, JSON is generally preferred for new development, whereas XML has its place, but generally treated as something that's a little bit legacy. So the way forward is JSON, and go with that.
I've been using XML for years, right? And as you say, this now is kind of a legacy thing, and we are trying to switch and modify all our applications to make them JSON. But treating this kind of semi-structured data types in SQL is not for free, I would say.
Oh, right? No, not at all. But the really cool thing is that the leaps and bounds that have been made in terms of handling these, and yes, we all have those grey hairs associated with XML. Anyway, so moving on. So we have SQL. We have good old regex. Speaking of grey hairs over the years, having to handle regex or regular expressions has been something that has I guess one of the cool things is that we've all wished that SQL had regex, and we've been waiting a long time for it. But the really cool thing is it's now built into the product, and SQL Server 2025 introducing native regular expression support. It's one of the most requested features because, yeah, regex can age you, but the fact that it's there now is massive, in my opinion. And so, yeah, a whole heap of functions that we can call. And of course, fuzzy string matching, which is brilliant. You know, this is the age of AI and being able to treat, you know, having fuzzy string matching is fundamental. And so, yeah, common pattern that people might use is, you know, clean your data with regex and then match it with fuzzy functions, and then of course, where possible, deduplicate the data. Alrighty, so moving on to graph queries. Yeah, as Javier mentioned before, you know, graph is so powerful in terms of pattern matching or you know, pattern-based traversal. And so, yeah, we have a couple of things at our disposal here. And yeah, cool. So we can use node and edge tables with a match clause for those pattern-based traversals. And a couple of call outs is shortest path, you know, finds the shortest route between nodes with variable length traversal. And, you know, something fundamental for that's, you know, for any development is try catch, which provides structured error handling. So, you know, a throw will re-raise or create our custom errors. So yeah, some awesome things that are within the course material. And now if we move on to the star of the show, which is AI assisted database development, which is going to accelerate your development. So yeah, GitHub Copilot, you know, this is, I use Copilot, I'd like to say every day, whereas in fact, I think it's more like every hour. And the important thing is, you know, don't use it to replace understanding, use it to accelerate your understanding. And, you know, summarizing this slide, you know, the best SQL developers are becoming AI assisted developers. So not AI dependent developers, you know, quite important thing there. The really cool thing is SQL Server Management Studio 22 and above provides AI powered T-SQL assistance directly within the editor. And of course, you know, this is bringing natural language to SQL. So we can describe in plain language what we want and get schema-aware queries. So, you know, if you hook it up right, I was doing a session earlier today on AI and testing data. You know, Copilot can read your active database connection. It knows the SQL version, tables, you know, the whole data definition language of your database and relationships and everything. So, yeah, massively brilliant. Alrighty, so if we move on to Fabric Copilot for SQL, quite a game changer if you're in the Fabric ecosystem. So Fabric Copilot brings AI assistance to SQL database workload within Microsoft Fabric. And yeah, we're now used to having the chat pane. You know, this accepts our natural language questions. So, you know, tell me what is the top, you know, 15 sales of whatever data we have. And then it will generate the T-SQL queries underneath. If we look at quick actions and fix, it corrects our errors, explains, and if we use explain, it describes the query logic in plain language. So it does, that in reverse. It takes what we have in our queries and produces plain language. So amazing utility for learning and understanding what the queries are doing. It's built on the same underlying tools as SQL Server Management Studio, Copilot. So we have that really cool, consistent experience across various apps and clients. So if we move on next to MCP, or Model Context Protocol, this is one area where I think, people are should have heard about this, but you're definitely going to hear a lot more about it over the next 12 months. Think of MCP in our realm as becoming what ODBC was for databases. MCP is a glue and a standard way for AI to interact with systems. It's an open standard for where an AI agent can interact with database and how it communicates. Alrighty, if we move on to AI workflows, this can be a little jarring for people, but the thing is, this is an area, don't think about AI replacing database developers. This is where we as database developers can use AI to replace, all the things that hold us back, or the toil that we deal with. And so the real power of AI workflow integration comes from combining all the AI tools at our disposal into our development workflow. So we might author things with Copilot, we'll connect things with MCP, we'll analyze with Fabric, and govern with rollback access controls. And we'll have instruction files that will tell our agent exactly what to do, and what, more importantly, what not to do. So having those guardrails within our AI workflow. Best practice here is, always, and I mean always, review AI generated SQL before you put it into production. And in fact, my recommendation is for MCP, never, always connect it to your lower level systems. Don't ever connect it to production. If you're following, best practices for CI/CD, then you should be connecting it to one of those many lower environments that you have. Alrighty, moving on to our decision guide. The decision guide, one thing I love about this is it reminds us there isn't one feature that solves every problem, right? So there's a whole heap of stuff we can identify which tool or feature to use for common scenarios. Use it as a quick reference for when designing database solutions. Alrighty, moving on to the last slide, one of the last slides, the key takeaways. If there's one thing I would take away from our session today, or the course material, is that SQL hasn't become less relevant because of AI. It's actually become more important because, we talk about hallucinations and stuff. The reason why AI hallucinates is because the data isn't, correct. And so, ensuring our data is correct means that AI will build and give us, great things. SQL Server 2025 with AI tools represents a major step forward in database development productivity. It's massive, and I'm really excited about it. Alrighty, preparation for the exam. So basically, this is where you can, don't try to memorize syntax. You need to understand why you'd use a particular feature. Scenario questions are what is important. And the exam isn't there to trick you. It's trying to see whether you'd make good engineering decisions. Javier, over to you.
All right, very good. Thank you, Hamish. Just closing the session today. 60 days of data and AI ahead. So still several days, several sessions in the horizon. So please reach out to the QR code. There was one question over there regarding to how to minimize the downtime on index rebuild, right? I would just set use the online version, and the resumable option is you use one of the latest SQL Server version. As we said before, for everything, use it with caution, right? And just to finalize, again, the slide for the certification to get your voucher. And with that, we just reach out at the end of the presentation. Hamish, it was a pleasure to be here today with you, presenting on this beautiful topic. It was also great to have the moderators answering all the questions behind the scenes. So thank you so much. And thank you, everybody, for participating today. And see you soon. All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Yes.
Bye.
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 Thank you all for joining, and thanks again to our speakers. This session is part of a series. To register for future shows and watch past episodes on demand, you can follow the link on the screen or in the chat. We're always looking to improve our sessions and your experience. If you have any feedback for us, we would love to hear what you have to say. You can find that link on the screen or in the chat. And we'll see you at the next one. Thank you all for joining, and thanks again to our speakers. This session is part of a series. To register for future shows and watch past episodes on demand, you can follow the link on the screen